Expedition to Newdale. This is a game inspired by the classic card Euro game Oh My Goods, which is a small game physically, but it's fairly convoluted. I mean, it's a real Euro game in the body of a small card game. Expedition to Newdale is based on a lot of similar ideas. If you know Oh My Goods, you'll be able to pick up this one more easily. It has a board, it has a couple of other things that are different. Also, it has a campaign system. It is an advanced level game divided in 8 chapters. That means that there's a story. Yes, it's not just role-playing games or highly thematic games, but these days also Euro games have stories. Basically, these are different scenarios which you can play in any order. It's your game, you can do whatever you want with it. But if you want to experience the narrative, then you start from scenario 1, and you play it, and then you play the other scenarios in order. You have different cards, different game components, different boards also, double-sided boards that are used in different scenarios. So if you like the game, definitely there is a lot of value here because you have a lot of replay value, a lot of different things that you can do, as these maps do work differently from one another. They have different challenges, different rules. So 8 scenarios that really are different. So here we have a board that around which I should say most of the game will happen. You will have upgrade tiles that will go in these spaces here. I guess I forgot to set them up there, but basically when you build next to one of those spaces where you will have a stack of upgrade tiles, you get to take one and you'll gain the corresponding benefit. There's a town where people will place their first building. They all start from the same building, and then as you build more buildings, you can usually place them 1 space or 2 spaces away from previous buildings of yours along this net, so you will spread around. And it is, if you build closer than your maximum distance, say you can build a distance of up to 2, but you decide to build only 1, then you can take a tile from the corresponding area. And okay, I feel guilty not showing you the tiles. Here are the tiles, and the symbols will tell you different things that you can do with them. Then we have a scoring track here, and also another area that is used to reserve actions. This is an action selection game. Players will start with 2 action tokens, and there's a phase where players will place their action tokens on specific actions, and then these will be resolved later. Each player also has a personal display. There's this cardboard display here, which has 2 areas indicating specific actions or specific conditions, which you can improve by spending actions and removing the token that is there, and then revealing an icon that gives you better options. For example, at the beginning of the game, yes, you can place a new building up to 2 spaces away from a previous one. You can remove that one, and now you can put it up to 3 spaces away, and if you put it only up to, then you get a tile. Then we have these slots here around which you will place your cards that represent buildings. They all start with a coal mine, and then as the game progresses, maybe you build more buildings, and all those are placed around these slots. With the exception of buildings that have a darker area here, they're placed here next to the board on this side and this area here, as a reminder that these buildings will activate and will give you their benefit in phase 6 of each turn. The game lasts 6 turns exactly. Then you have these cubes that represent goods. We don't know yet what goods they represent until they go on buildings. Looking at the buildings more up close, here in the top left corner you have the cost in coins that you need to spend to build a building from your hand and place it next to your production board. This is the cost. There may be a discount, so if, for example, I build that building in a space that has that symbol, say if I build it there, for example, then I only have to pay, in this case, 3 instead of 6, because that terrain gives me a discount of 3. Here's the number of victory points that the building is worth at the end of the game. Here you have the production, basically, and the good. So each cube that is placed on this card is a cattle value, is a cattle unit with a value of 2. Each cube placed here is a unit of ore, which also has a value of 2. Each cube placed here is a piece of coal that has a value of 1. So that keeps track of how many you have of a certain kind and the value of each. These symbols on the left of that symbol indicates how many workers are necessary to produce that. So in a turn, I will need 2 yellow workers and 2 blue workers to produce cattle. But how much do I produce? It all depends on where I place my action marker. I place it on a slot on my board when I decide to use one of my actions to produce with one of my buildings. And if I place it here, say this is, if I place it here, that card will give me that number of cubes if I simply use the workers indicated here. So if I place my action here and I am able to use 2 yellow workers and 2 blue workers here, then when I resolve that action, I get 2 cubes of that kind. If I place it here, I need 1 fewer workers than required, but I also only produce 1 cube. If I am able to actually recruit 2 more workers than required and I place my action here, then I'll get 3. So that means that, and I explain how that works, but early in the turn you get a sense of how many workers of each kind may be available, and so you are reserving actions based on that. So there's a bit of a push of luck here because you're hoping that then all of the right workers will be available. So you produce goods. That means you place cubes on those cards using those production tokens. Also, if you have your action token next to a building, you can also produce with that building using the chaining action, which means you spend other resources using the symbols on the right of the whatever the resource is. So, for example, if I'm producing here, I could discard cards that have that symbol. So the symbol that you see here is the symbol that the card generates when it's discarded for chaining. So actually simply I could discard this card when I'm producing with this card to get more cubes. Each card that I discard that way, say these 2, then each will give me an extra cube. Also, when you produce by chaining, you do gain an extra cube, regardless of how many were produced through chaining. As long as you chain, you get an extra cube for that. And that's how it works. You may also produce by chaining, by moving things from one card to the other. Suppose, now I can't find the right card, of course. Oh, there you go. Actually, here. The tannery, see, produces leather using cattle. So I can produce as usual. Suppose the right workers are available, then I produce what it says there. Maybe there are other cards I can discard. Also, I can move cattle. Remember, cattle is another way of producing. So I can just move cattle from here to here. And voila, I chained. And that also has improved my production because leather is more valuable than cattle. So that's the general idea about production. During the game, you will produce. Production will generate money because each cube that I move from here is worth 3 gold. So by gaining money, I will build carts, I will build more buildings, I'll try to meet different conditions that will allow me to score points. Each turn starts with the players revealing an event card. There is a deck of 7 event cards that also acts as the countdown clock. So when the last event card is revealed, that is the last turn of the game. You resolve the event simply doing what the card says, and then you look at this display here, which gives you a sense of the workers that will be available. Then players plan, they commit to different actions by placing these tokens here. You can place them on your production board, as we said, or you can place them or you can place them here. This one allows you to spend 7 coins to acquire a 3rd action marker, or to spend 13 coins to acquire a 4th action marker, and that's clearly very desirable, also 3 victory points. If you place your action marker here, when it's time to resolve the actions, you discard 2 cards and you produce 4 coals plus any 1 good of any kind. If you place it here, you retain a card You discard all of the other cards, you draw an equal number plus 3. That simply gives you more cards. This one you can spend more. You can spend 4 coins to remove these tokens that I mentioned earlier, and by removing them you get better advantages for the rest of the game. This one allows you to build a building. Later in the turn, everybody gets a chance to build a building for free without opportunity cost, so to speak, because you can choose actually to get 2 cards instead. But if you want to build 2 buildings in a turn, you reserve that action, you build a building now and 1 later. So back to us. At the beginning of the turn, as we said, people reveal their card, then they commit, they plan their actions. Then we draw, not exactly meeples, but we draw workers from the bag. And we draw 4 of them randomly. 1, 2, 3, one more. 4. And we place them next to the event card, next to the color slots of the corresponding color. Say we put the red ones here and the green one here. That's why, as I said, the card gives you a sense of the goods, of the workers that will be available, but not a full picture. So now I know that this turn, 1 yellow worker is available, 4 green, 4 red, and 1 blue. And then we start resolving the actions that we reserved earlier. Those workers are not spent. Like, every player can use those as many times as they want. Using here means that when you're producing, you demonstrate that you have the necessary things to produce the good that you're trying to produce. Say here, for example, I'm trying to produce this one, 2 green, I need 2 green and 2 blue. There are 2 or more green available there. There's only 1 blue, so I'm 1 short, but it's okay because I reserved the slot for being 1 short, or I reserve this one. So if you reserve a production level that you cannot meet based on those workers, you can discard cards, usually at a rate of 3 cards for each worker that you do not have available. If you bought that upgrade, then you can discard 2 cards to pay for each production worker that you cannot otherwise produce. And that's pretty much the idea of how you produce, how you resolve that. So we resolve all of the actions from the board that I showed you, and or from the production. People acquire goods. Then everybody gets a chance, as I said, of building a building for free, meaning in terms of opportunity, you still have to pay. Remember, you will have a hand of cards with different buildings, different costs. And when you build a building in general, again, you place it on the board. That may give you advantages, access to certain resources, access to way of scoring points. After this phase, which is phase 5, when everybody builds a building, we got phase 6, when the buildings that are placed here will generate their reward. And this is pretty much the idea. I know there are a lot of phases and it feels a little fiddly, and it is a little fiddly when you're learning. It can be a little overwhelming because I haven't even told you about all the ways to score points, and there are more. Those ways will change from scenario to scenario. You also have to know, of course, the symbology of the tiles. But in general, this is the idea. You get a sense of the workers that are available each turn. You commit to actions, you reveal the actual number of workers that will be available, you trigger production effects using those workers and other cards and using the chaining effects. You resolve those actions up there. You continue like this until at the end of the game you score points from multiple sources. A lot of them will have to do with buildings, will have to do with the competing objectives. But in general, this is how you play Expedition to Newdale. So, Expedition to Newdale. The first time that I played it was with my friends, a game night, and I had to tell you, it was pretty much a disappointment. No one really liked it. I just received a lot of complaints. I was trying to hold my opinion. I didn't fall in love with it either, but my friends were a lot more vehement about the game. Biggest complaint was that the game felt very fiddly the first time that we played it. It was really a struggle to remember all those little rules and exceptions to those rules. And I don't know why the game is not particularly complicated. We played action selection, worker placement, games with a lot more icons than this one, and yet we really struggled to put it all together to see the big picture. Another complaint was that there were too many goods. In some cases, you had a victory condition for a scenario that would emphasize certain resources, and some players never saw them. They never got the cards that would produce those goods, or they would find something that produces one good and something that processes another, and they struggled to see the synergies. All these are fairly reasonable complaints. The next one also is reasonable, actually even more so because it's accurate, which is my friends complained that the game felt too much like a solitaire game, which truly that is the case. You can resolve many phases simultaneously. All players can go together at the same time, which saves time because there's absolutely no way in many phases in which players can influence each other. What you do has absolutely no effect on what other players are doing. Any number of players can reserve a certain action, so it's not there is a fight for position like in worker placement. So if you're just going around the table, it's not simultaneous. If you're playing with 4 players, it's really just a solitaire game in which you're waiting a lot of time before you're taking the next move. You can do simultaneously, but at least the first time that you play the game, like in our case, people were uncertain on how to do things, so we were still waiting to see what other players did, to check that no one was making mistakes. And so it just felt like a solitaire game with a lot of downtime. So my friends really didn't like it. However, precisely because of the solitaire thing, then I decided to keep playing it. And so actually I set it up later for solitaire, and in the last days I played through all of the scenarios, so solitaire, and I really liked it. I have to try it with different friends, and maybe now that I also know it better, I can teach it more effectively, and maybe the initial game would not be as difficult as the first game was. But as a solitaire game, I liked it. I liked the simplicity, that who knew actually that was the case, because when you boil it down, of course, it is a game in which you are deciding whether you want to improve your set of buildings or produce with those buildings, or any combination between those two, and you want to risk how much you're gonna try to produce. Because of course, if you're producing a lot, well, it's great if you can pull it off, but then maybe you don't have the right workers. I like the variety from scenario to scenario. Things do change. The map changes. Different types of meeples are placed in the bag. I don't want to give you too many spoilers. The landscape works differently. There are different objectives that you need to fulfill. And if you're playing solo, the conditions to win are pretty tough. You can just play like in multiplayer, ignoring the specific solo victory conditions, simply to see what your score is. But if you try the specific victory conditions, it's really hard. It's good. It should be challenging. As a solitaire game, to me, it's perfectly fine. There are groups in which actually probably the lack of interaction will be a plus. I know many gamers that don't like the direct confrontation, and basically, if you're playing against other people, it's a solitaire game in which you're trying to beat a score that, instead of being written in the manual, when you're playing solo proper, is being established by what other players do. But other than that, there's really no interaction. The only way in which people can interact, in a sense, with one another, where your actions matter to me, is if somebody's taking a tile. But you're not gonna go for a certain tile specifically to damage somebody else. If that kind of interaction happens, it's usually coincidental, because on your way to push your own goals, you happen to take a tile that somebody else has wanted. It's just not profitable to place a building where it's not good for you otherwise, just to get that tile. So the game is solitaire. Is a solitaire game that you can play with other people, and if your game group doesn't enjoy direct confrontation, then this is going to be great for you. So if that's the kind of thing that your group likes, or if you like solitaire games, then I think actually there's a lot to like in Expedition to Newdale. Once you get into the game, which is easier than it looks at first, but somehow the training, the initiation can be painful. Once you get into it. Actually, the flow of the game is really fun. It is fun to see your little coal mine grow into a small village and see the synergies. And from your struggling with these 2 action tokens, by the end of the last turn you have more action tokens, you're producing a lot of stuff, building big buildings. You do get the sense of acceleration of engine building, which is fun to have in many Euro games. It is still pretty different from Oh My Goods, so if you like the game, I don't know that automatically you will like this one. But if you like Euro games, if you like engine building, section selection, and you don't mind a little bit of fiddliness, then Expedition to Newdale has a lot of good things, not the last of which being a lot of replay value because the scenarios do play differently, and to me that is considerable added value. Expedition to Newdale, maybe not for everybody, maybe not the first time that you try it, but try to stick with it, give it a try or 2 or 3. It's a game that I enjoy, solitaire, and it's a game that I think other people can enjoy too.